Hello again. A very belated Happy New Year and welcome to the first of our 2022 online talks. Although, as the COVID situation eases, this may be the last of our current online series. Next month, we're hoping to return to face-to-face meetings, and we're hoping that our April meeting, the Luddite Memorial Lecture, may be back in its usual lecture room at the University of Huddersfield. Today's talk, for which we have two speakers, Christine Verguson and Beverley Norris, both of them members of the Society. It is both a talk, a report, and an appeal. Memories of Our Square, the title of the talk, is also the title of a project led by the local History Society as part of the government-funded Huddersfield High Street Heritage Action Zone. And the square in question is St George's Square. For 175 years, it's featured significantly in the life of the town, and probably in all our lives. The project is about exploring that history and about gathering our memories of the square, memories which you will all have. It's our square, and Christine and Beverley will be inviting you to get involved with the project by sharing your memories of the square and what it means to you. Christine and Beverley.
Hello, my name is Christine Verguson, and as Cyril has already mentioned, along with my colleague Beverley, I am coordinating the Memories of the Square project for Huddersfield Local History Society. The first thing anyone arriving in Huddersfield by train will see as they descend the steps from the Grade 1 listed station are the fine Victorian buildings that make up St George's Square. As for the station, architectural critic Ian Nairn described it as a kind of stately home with trains, and Sir John Betjeman once referred to it as the most splendid in England. But from the businesses carried on in its buildings to festivals, royal visits and even protests, St George's Square has had a rich and colourful history. The Memories of Our Square project will culminate in the publication of a book celebrating the history of St George's Square, in which we hope to reflect the ways in which the square has been seen and experienced over the years, and is still being seen and experienced today. On our website, you can already find some of the interesting snippets we have discovered in the archives, as well as stories that people have shared with us, and we will be adding new material as we go along. I should emphasise that this is still very much a work in progress, and this talk is not intended to tell the history of St George's Square, but rather to provide brief glimpses of the role, or indeed roles, the square has played in the life of our town. And now I will hand you over to Beverley, who will present our talk.
Thank you, Christine and Cyril. My name is Beverley, and I have been helping Christine with the Memories of Our Square project. Although I feel I must make it clear that Christine has done most of the research and has taken some beautiful photographs, including the one on this slide. Some of you may have already worked out when it was taken, but if not, take a look at the Memories of Our Square website and all will be revealed. Throughout this talk, I'll be quoting some of the memories that have been shared with us, along with photographs of the square and some snippets from old newspaper reports. These two views of the square were taken at different times, but many of you may remember the square looking something like this. Some of you may remember not only the flowers, but also trolleybuses. John told us, "I would hurry out of the station across St George's Square to catch the trolleybus to Crossland Moor. Last bus 11:55 p.m. The line-up of trolleybuses at 11:55 was an impressive memory." Which shows that within living memory, the square has not stood still. But it's unlikely you'll remember the square when it looked like this. Like the previous images, these postcards again show the square from different viewpoints. Before the trolleybuses, there were the trams, and if you look carefully at the bottom right of the left-hand image, you can see the tram lines. Note also the octagonal hut. In more recent times, some remember a circular taxi office made of wood. We think the image on the right was probably colourised, but it still presents a vivid snapshot of the square. The statue seen here of one Prime Minister, Robert Peel, has gone, to be replaced by one of Huddersfield's own, Harold Wilson, although the plinth of the Peel statue can still be seen in Ravensknoll Park. On the left of this slide, John Bradley's map of 1820 shows Huddersfield's town centre before the square. Westgate is just above the now long gone circular Cloth Hall on Market Street. With the exception of the bowling green, the land north of Westgate is undeveloped. You can see the marketplace at the bottom of Westgate, hemmed in by buildings. This was the site of two previous George hotels. In 1851, the George had to be moved next to the railway station so that John William Street could be constructed. We can see the hotel in the Ordnance Survey map on the right of the slide. The circular tracks which enabled trams to be reversed were a recent addition when this map was created, the plans for them being submitted in 1886. Letters were frequently written to local papers about the square and also the station. While some correspondence were complimentary, many were critical. Sometimes people just sent in suggestions. In December 1886, J.W. Scholes asked for a fountain and trees in the square, as well as a statue of Queen Victoria to commemorate her Jubilee. Not to mention lavatories at the station for both ladies and gentlemen. In the same month, S.B. of Carlton Street told the readers of the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, "When passing through St George's Square yesterday and looking to where the clock should be, I could not but hope that the next time it showed its face it would be accompanied with some fire, not only to keep it warm, but at dark to light up its face, so that the railway travellers may see the exact time, and it would also be a boon to the public." But from the beginning there was concern about the dangerous state of the square. At an inquest into the death of an ostler, Ambler Woodhead, in 1859, witness Thomas Cooper, a cab proprietor, said that Woodhead, driving a horse and dog cart, might have taken the bend at too fast a speed, but he did not think the accident would have happened if there had not been a drop in the sets in the square. The foreman of the jury remarked that he had seen many narrow escapes at the same place. The jury, passing a verdict of accidental death, added that the death of the said Ambler Woodhead has been partly caused by the unfinished state of St George's Square, and request that the surveyor and authorities will draw the attention of the agents of Sir John William Ramsden to the necessity of having the square put into immediate repair. Sir John William Ramsden was the lord of the manor of Huddersfield, and the square had been developed by the Ramsden trustees. But this is just one of the stories of the square. While our purpose is to reflect how the square has been seen and experienced over the years, we do aim to put this into some sort of context. The image on the left is a timeline of the square as it appears on our website, and which we are adding to as we discover events of which we were previously unaware. The timeline will also feature in our book. As you can see from the timeline's earliest entry, St George's Square can be said to have begun when Earl Fitzwilliam laid the foundation stone for the railway station on October 9th, 1846. The first train arriving at the station in August 1847, although the square was not planned at this time. It's interesting to see that Huddersfield would have had its very own Royal Arcade if it wasn't for the arrival of the Lion, which resulted in a change of name. In the same year, 1853, the timeline notes that a large crowd gathered beneath a window in Shaw's warehouse to hear an election address. This indicates that from its earliest years the square was seen as a public space, and this is a theme to which we will return later in this talk. Describing the official opening of the Lion Arcade in January 1854, the Huddersfield Chronicle described its fountain with its goldfish, picturesque shells and sparkling jets, the conservatories replete with choice plants and beautiful birds. A motto, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof," was painted on a slab above the conservatories. But on the very same page, the Huddersfield Chronicle noted that they had received several complaints relating to the filthy state of thoroughfare in front of the station and the muddy condition of the square. We started this project with several themes already in mind. The nature of the buildings was one obvious theme, and the presence of the station has meant that the square has always been a place for arrivals and departures. But then other themes have been thrown up by our research. In the remainder of this talk, we will touch briefly on some of the themes which appear in the boxes on this slide. If you have memories associated with any of them, please consider sharing them. And if there's anything you think we've missed out, then please do get in touch to let us know. On the theme of accidents, one has already been mentioned, but sadly our searches in the archives have shown that accidents were not infrequent. On the morning of Tuesday, August 11th, 1885, part of a new section of the station roof collapsed, killing 2 men. Another tragedy took the lives of 7 people, 3 women, 3 men and a 5-month-old baby, who were killed when the Lindley tramcar overturned in Railway Street just before making its way into the square. This happened in 1883, and in addition to the fatalities, many more were injured. In the aftermath of the accident, the engine and cars stood outside the station before being driven to the tram shed. On a happier note, the arrival of the railway in Huddersfield brought with it many opportunities, including the possibility of cheap excursions, which were regularly promoted in the local press. For example, in 1853, the London and North Western Railway advertised an annual treat for the working classes, Marcus's cheap trip from Huddersfield to Liverpool and back for 5 shillings. Mr. Marcus was described as the company's manager and conductor of excursion trains. The special train would leave Huddersfield at 7:45 a.m. on Monday the 20th of June, and passengers would be allowed to return on either the 6:45 a.m. or the 6:15 p.m. train on any day until the following Saturday. Amongst the Liverpool attractions advertised was the Seaside resort of New Brighton. Although he didn't take a cheap excursion, Stan has told us that the first time he got on a train in Huddersfield was in 1967, when he also went on a trip to New Brighton. Jenny still remembers how she felt in 1962 when she said goodbye to her parents in St George's Square before boarding the train to start a new life in the Women's Royal Air Force. But people have also lived in the square. Early arrivals included the Wigney family. Thomas Wigney, who had been at the Old George in the marketplace, became the first landlord of the New George Hotel. In the 1861 census, Thomas's occupation is given as hotel keeper and wine merchant. His 22-year-old son is also described as a wine merchant, and daughters Lucy Ann, 20, and Louisa Helen, 18, make up the family. 12 servants are also listed as living at the hotel, but there were only 9 lodgers, 7 of whom were commercial travellers. One was accompanied by his wife, and the remaining guest is described as a manufacturer. St George's Square has experienced many different types of arrivals over the years, but there were also those who arrived at the station having travelled across the world to begin a new life in Huddersfield, and this is reflected in the diverse communities that today make up our town. Not only do we intend to reflect this in our book, but we are working together with other heritage and artistic organisations as part of Huddersfield's Heritage High Street Action Zone Consortium. This year, the consortium's cultural programme will be focusing upon this theme of arrivals. Many people whose first glimpse of Huddersfield was St George's Square will have come to Huddersfield to begin a new job. The growth of the textile industry in Victorian Huddersfield, along with other industries originally associated with improving textile production, resulted in people arriving from agricultural areas in search of work, often trying to escape devastating poverty. Although many would come to work in the mills and factories or to build our infrastructure, many women came to Huddersfield to work as servants in the houses of those who had become rich during the Industrial Revolution. Those of you who have viewed the Huddersfield Local History Society's YouTube channel before may be aware that I have a particular interest in these women, and I have been researching those who were servants in the big houses of Egerton. I have examined census data and have discovered that most of these servants were not born in Huddersfield. And looking into newspaper archives, I have found advertisements in local papers from around the country that were placed by a servant registry operating from the Lion Arcade. In the archives section of oursquare.org, I have tried to imagine what it would have been like for a young woman stepping out of the station and walking across the square before the final leg of her journey to a new position arranged by this servant registry. Following the building of the station, the George Hotel and Lion Arcade, 2 grand buildings designed to hold warehouses and offices were added to the square. Tight's building, shown on the left, was completed in 1856. On the right, Britannia buildings, built for woollen manufacturers and merchants George Crossland and Sons to provide them with a warehouse, offices and a showroom, was completed by 1859, but both buildings were occupied by more than one company. Crossland had mills in Lockwood and Crossland Moor, and 2 of his sons became members of Parliament representing the town. T.P. Crossland between 1865 and 1868, and Sir Joseph Crossland between 1893 and 1895. Before the end of the century, the firm had vacated Britannia Buildings, and in 1902 the Huddersfield Building Society moved in. Lion Arcade was, of course, home to a wide range of businesses over the years. In 1855, Professors Bower and Saville opened their London and Paris hairdressing and perfumery establishment, promising their customers clean brushes, while at the same time Henry Tempest was offering fish, oysters, game and poultry in what he described in his adverts as a splendid building. No wonder then that the arcade provided a suitable home for lady drapers such as Miss Helen Ratcliffe, who specialised in selling goods from Ireland. And occasionally those shopping in the arcade could look across the square and spot one of Edison's horse auctions. Woods is a name that will be familiar to many Huddersfield families, being, until fairly recently, the place to go for everything to do with music. For many years, Joe Wood's Pianoforte and Music Warehouse was situated in St George's Square, where Joe claimed to stock the largest and most varied assortment of pianofortes and harmoniums in southwest Yorkshire. While at one end of the market he sold harmoniums to churches, chapels and schools, it was also a place to find second-hand and returned from hire pianos, as well as sheet music. But perhaps more surprising is that in the 1970s, the fan club for Manchester United legend and Northern Irish footballer George Best was located at 19 St George's Square, Huddersfield. Best's agent, Ken Stanley, who also represented Dennis Law, had his office here. Stanley had previously worked as sales manager at Mitre Sports in Huddersfield before setting up as a professional football agent. Although we are nowhere near to finishing our research into the history of the square, it is clear that there is enough material on the protests that have taken place there to fill a book of its own. While the gatherings at the hustings in 1853 mentioned earlier could not be described as protest, one newspaper reports that on polling day there were over 20,000 people in the square, including not only ladies but many hundreds, if not thousands, of women belonging to the humbler classes. This was at a time when, according to the same article, there were only 1,350 on the electoral register. And in a way, the square could be said to reflect the history of democracy in this country. In 1866, thousands of working men and 13 bands crowded into the square to support the Parliamentary Reform Bill, which would extend the franchise. Or that was how the Leeds Mercury described it. But it is important to be aware of the partisan nature of reporting. The Huddersfield Chronicle, less sympathetic to the idea of electoral reform, suggested that only 2,000 or 3,000 had come along to hear the speeches, the rest being idlers and onlookers. Thousands again filled the square in October 1884 for a demonstration led by Liberal MPs in support of extending the franchise. Here too were veterans who had supported the Great Reform Act of 1832, some of whom brought along their time-stained banners, including the Skelmanthorpe flag, created in 1819 in response to the Peterloo massacre. The slide shows a demonstration to mark May Day in 1907. Speakers included Labour councillors, as well as Victor Grayson, who in July 1907 was elected MP for the Colne Valley on a socialist platform. The first such May Day march, ending in the square, took place in 1892 and was held every year in peacetime until 1997. And also revived in 2004. But protests in the square on a wide variety of issues were frequent, and it also provided a speaker's corner for the town, as did the marketplace. There were anti-conscription meetings during the First World War, but one of the biggest demonstrations took place on the 27th of September 1908, when the square was reportedly full. Estimates ranged from 20,000 to 50,000 to hear speeches from 5 platforms arranged around the Peel statue. The speakers included Mrs. Pankhurst and her daughter Adela, who had organised the rally. Each platform passed the same resolution, calling upon the government to enfranchise the women of the country on the same terms as men during the coming session of Parliament, as well as expressing admiration of the brave women who have suffered imprisonment for the cause of liberty. The square was also the place where Huddersfield people went to express their patriotism. Although the Crimean War ended in April 1856, May 29th was the day set aside across the country for national rejoicing. The enthusiasm with which Huddersfield embraced the day was noted by the Manchester Guardian, the town being entirely given up to pleasure, with a procession departing from and arriving back in the square, where an estimated 35,000 to 40,000 people assembled, including around 15,000 Sunday school pupils and their teachers, not to mention soldiers who had fought in the war, and many more. The Huddersfield Chronicle described the events of the day and those present in some detail, remarking that the singing was such that it could be heard as far away as Lindley and Crossland Moor. The Examiner report said little more than the size of the procession had never been equalled in this neighbourhood, and it was good to see that people were coming together and making the most of the holiday. On the 19th of May 1900, a large crowd also gathered to celebrate the relief of Mafeking. Royalty, unsurprisingly, brought people to the square. They packed in to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria, and on May 24, 2007, the Queen and Prince Philip spent some time in St George's Square on the way to the university. The image on the slide, taken from the Illustrated London News, gives a good impression of the size of the crowd that turned out to witness the unveiling by Lord Houghton of the statue of Sir Robert Peel in June 1873. Note the people on the top of the station roof. If you think that this is just a flight of fancy by the illustrator, we should say that several descriptions of big events held in the square refer to people cheering from the roofs of the surrounding buildings. From Band of Hope rallies to military parades, over the years people have crowded into the square for many different reasons, but it has always had a strong association with sport. Sharon was there to celebrate the promotion of Huddersfield Town to the Premier League in 2017. She remembers that the atmosphere was electric, with a sea of blue and white, children on parents' shoulders, fans adorned with scarves, waving flags, and with the proud stone lion on lion chambers draped in a blue and white scarf. And it was 100 years ago this year that Huddersfield Town brought home the FA Cup. Barriers had been erected in the square in the expectation of a huge crowd, but there were so many people there they had to spill over into the surrounding streets. The one sporting event that will be forever associated with Huddersfield and St George's Square is Rugby League. As a result of a meeting at the George Hotel on April 29, 1885, the Northern Rugby Football Union was established and Rugby League was born. But there were other sports that made use of the square. For example, cyclists would often assemble there before riding out together on a Sunday excursion. Our Society's cycling historian, Richard Hobson, has told us how, when 50 cyclists from across the town met there on Palm Sunday 1894, before setting off to Ilkley, they attracted a great deal of attention because it was the first time some of these cycling machines had been seen in the district. When the Tour de France passed through Huddersfield in July 2014, it didn't come to the square. Instead, large screens were placed there so people could watch the race, and the occasion was marked by a temporary fruit and vegetable stall. Here, Jeanette and Maria are talking to a French stallholder before setting off on their own cycle ride. In recent years, much use has been made of the square for markets and festivals. The first Huddersfield Food and Drink Festival took place in 2001 and became an annual event, although sadly, because of COVID, it had to be cancelled in 2020 and 21. From aerobatics to giant inflatable sea creatures, Huddersfield's festivals of light were certainly something to behold. Music has always played its part in the life of the square. We've already seen how demonstrations were often accompanied by several bands. Bands from the villages around the district frequently performed in the square, and then there were the locally raised volunteer regiments who had their own bands. Performances would often be advertised in advance. Perhaps, though, the Huddersfield Chronicle could have been a bit more charitable when reporting on the monster gathering of nonconformist Sunday schools which took place on Whit Monday 1860. It suggested that the children's poor singing might not have lived up to the expectations of the spectators. However, they also pointed out that the children were damp and uncomfortable from standing in the rain for 2 hours. We have already made several references to transport, and we do not have enough time to do justice to the subject in this talk. But this image does provide a useful reminder of the importance that transport has played in the life of the square. However, over the years, the way St George's Square has been used has not been without contention. There were those who thought it was the perfect place for an urban park, while others argued that both people and traffic should be able to move freely across the square. But large rallies in the square could stop the trams. In February 1884, the Council's Tramways Subcommittee considered whether or not it would be more practical if the new services to Paddock and Mould Green started nearer to Kirkgate, but the idea was rejected. Today, of course, St George's Square is the place to go if you want to get a taxi. But in the past, there were frequent attempts to limit the number of hackney carriages waiting in the square. When in 1852 a correspondent to the Huddersfield Chronicle suggested that the cab stand in New North Road be moved to the square as there was only one stand outside the station, the editor reminded readers that this was private property. All who go into the square, whether with cabs or without, go there on sufferance and might be completely blocked out any day. We can't leave St George's Square without talking about estate buildings. Together with the George Hotel, estate buildings are being restored in collaboration with Historic England as part of the High Street's Historic Action Zones initiative. The right-hand image shows the corner between Railway Street and Westgate shortly after the scaffolding went up last summer. And on the left we can see how estate buildings looked when the Duke and Duchess of Albany came to Huddersfield to open Beaumont Park in October 1883. On their arrival at the station they were received in its first-class refreshment room by the mayor and the council members before making their way to the park. Estate buildings would have provided a good vantage point to see the royal party pass by. In the words of the Ramsden Estates cashier, the new offices were opened without ceremony on the 14th of September 1870 and included not only the Ramsden Estate offices but accommodation to let. For example, J. Sotheby, who sold harnesses, whips and bags, moved his business there. And on the Westgate side, estate buildings also housed the somewhat exclusive Huddersfield Club. But the building also points towards some of the people who helped to make St George's Square, and who do not usually find a place in the history books. As David Wiles, chair of Huddersfield Civic Society, says in an article he has written for our website, little is known about the masons who cut and tooled the sandstone and sculpted the decorative features. Draw close to these buildings to admire and even touch the stonework, noting the copings, cornices and balustrades, armorials, tracery, festoons, ornate capitals, and especially on the estate office, the elaborate carvings of birds, animals, flowers and foliage, and for those with sharp eyes, the bare bottom of a naked man. The power and the charm of these buildings lies as much in these features, some of which were said to have been carved in situ. We hope you agree that St George's Square is indeed something that deserves to be celebrated. Please visit the website oursquare.org and do consider sharing your own memories. Thank you for listening.
Many thanks to you both, and good luck with the project. If you have any memories of the square, photographs even, or documents you would like to share, do please get in touch by using the address that's now showing on the screen. Alternatively, you can find out more about the project and how you can help by using the Huddersfield Local History Society website. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Take care and goodbye for now.